Welcome to DCF Investigations. There are mysteries that haunt the archives of criminal history, not because of the brutality of the violence or the cunning of the perpetrator, but because the scene left behind defies all logical explanation. We are accustomed to crimes of passion, to robberies gone wrong, and to the tragic results of human greed. But every so often, investigators stumble upon a tableau so surreal, so alien to the standard rhythms of life and death, that it seems to belong to the pages of a science fiction novel rather than a police file. We are traveling back to the winter of 1966, to the turbulent and mystical landscape of Brazil, where two men climbed a hill to meet a destiny that remains obscured by the passage of time. They were found wearing formal suits, waterproof coats, and most chillingly, thick lead masks covering their eyes. This is the story of the lead masks case, a puzzle that sits at the uncomfortable intersection of murder, mysticism, and the unexplainable. To truly understand the gravity of this case, we must first immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of Brazil in the mid-1960s. It was a time of profound transition and tension. The country was under a military dictatorship that had begun in 1964, creating a climate of suspicion, surveillance, and suppressed information. Yet, paradoxically, it was also a golden age for spiritualism and the esoteric. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union had captured the global imagination. And in Brazil, this technological obsession merged with a deep-rooted cultural belief in the spiritual world. Scientific spiritualism was a growing movement, a subculture of people who believed that the gap between science and the supernatural was closing. They believed that electronics, radio waves, and engineering could be used to communicate with spirits, or perhaps with visitors from other worlds. It is in this specific, charged environment that our two protagonists lived and died. Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana were not drifters or madmen living on the fringes of society. They were respected members of their community in Campos dos Goitacazes, a city located to the northeast of Rio de Janeiro. Both men were electronic technicians, skilled in the repair of televisions and radios. In 1966, this was a cutting-edge profession. They understood circuits, frequencies, and the invisible highways of information that traveled through the air. Manoel and Miguel were family men, friends and business partners who shared a secret life that went far beyond soldering irons and vacuum tubes. They were deeply entrenched in the study of the paranormal, often conducting experiments that attempted to bridge the divide between the physical and the ethereal. On August 17, 1966, the two men set out on a journey that would be their last. They told their families that they were traveling to São Paulo to purchase a car and some electronic components for their business. This provided a logical cover story, a mundane reason to be carrying a significant amount of cash. It is estimated that they were carrying approximately 2.3 million cruzeiros, a substantial sum at the time, equivalent to about $1,000 in the currency of the era. They boarded a bus in Campos at 9 a.m., but their destination was not São Paulo. They were headed for Niterói, a city just across the bay from Rio de Janeiro. The timeline of their final hours has been reconstructed through witness testimonies, creating a trail of breadcrumbs that ends abruptly at the foot of the hill. They arrived in Niterói around 2 p.m. The weather was turning. The sky was heavy with the threat of rain, a common occurrence in the Brazilian winter. Upon arrival, they did not act like men in a hurry. They visited a specialized electronics shop, though records of what they purchased, if anything, remain vague. What we do know for certain is that they stopped at a small shop to buy waterproof raincoats. This detail is crucial because it suggests forethought. They knew they would be outside, exposed to the elements, and they intended to stay dry. They purchased identical coats. This uniformity would later add to the ritualistic appearance of the crime scene. At a local bar, a witness observed the men purchasing a bottle of mineral water. The witness, a bartender, later told police that Miguel appeared nervous, frequently checking his watch, while Manoel seemed calm but focused. They insisted on keeping the receipt for the water bottle, a strange action for such a trivial purchase, unless they believed the timestamp or the location would be important later. This was late in the afternoon. The gloom of the twilight was approaching, and the rain had begun to fall in earnest. This is the last time anyone saw Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana alive. They were seen heading toward Morro do Vintém, or Vintém Hill, a rugged, elevated area that overlooked the city and the bay. 3 days passed. On August 20th, 1966, a young boy named Jorge da Costa Alves was flying a kite on the slopes of Vintém Hill. The terrain was rough, covered in tall grass and dense shrubbery, a place rarely visited except by those seeking solitude or trouble. As Jorge navigated the brush, he stumbled upon a sight that would send him running back to civilization in terror. Lying side by side in the tall grass were the bodies of 2 men. The police response was, by modern standards, frustratingly slow. Due to the difficulty of the terrain and bureaucratic delays, the authorities did not reach the bodies until the following day, August 24th. By then, decomposition had already begun to set in, accelerated by the humidity and the local fauna. When the investigators finally secured the scene, they were met with a tableau that baffled even the most seasoned detectives. Manoel and Miguel were lying on their backs, side by side. There were no signs of a struggle. The grass around them was not trampled in a way that suggested a fight or a frantic attempt to escape. They were dressed in their formal suits, over which they wore the waterproof raincoats they had purchased just hours before their death. But it was what was on their faces that gave the case its name. Both men were wearing handmade lead masks, shaped like sunglasses, but without lenses, designed to cover the eyes completely. These were not carnival masks. They were crude, utilitarian objects, likely fashioned by the men themselves using the tools of their trade. In the world of electronics and radiology, lead is used for one primary purpose: shielding against radiation. Next to the bodies, police found an empty water bottle and a packet containing 2 small towels. But the most perplexing piece of evidence was a small notebook found in the pocket of one of the men. Inside, written in Portuguese, were cryptic instructions that read like a recipe for a bizarre ritual. The note read, 4:30 p.m., be at the agreed place. 6:30 p.m., swallow capsules. After effect, protect metals, wait for signal mask. These words, scrawled in a hurry, became the centerpiece of the investigation. Swallow capsules. Protect metals. Wait for signal. The note implied a schedule, a planned event that the men were strictly adhering to. The agreed place was clearly Vintém Hill. The time, 6:30 p.m., coincided with the time witnesses said they were heading up the hill. The mention of capsules immediately suggested poison or drugs, while protect metals and the lead masks pointed toward a fear of something radioactive or intensely luminous. The autopsy provided more questions than answers. By the time the coroner examined the bodies, the internal organs were too badly decomposed to run reliable toxicology tests. The police could not definitively say whether the men had died of a heart attack, poison, or asphyxiation. There were no gunshot wounds, no stab marks, and no blunt force trauma. It was as if they had simply laid down and ceased to exist. The money they were carrying was gone, leading some detectives to favor a robbery theory. However, the watch on one of the victims' wrists was left behind, and the expensive electronic tools they often carried were not the primary focus. If this was a robbery, it was a robbery that took place in the middle of an elaborate, staged suicide or ritual. As news of the lead masks case spread, the media frenzy began. The public was captivated by the mixture of science and superstition. Theories began to proliferate, ranging from the plausible to the fantastic. The first and most grounded theory was that of a scientific spiritualist experiment gone wrong. Friends and family of the victims revealed that Manoel and Miguel were members of a group that believed in the ability to contact extraterrestrial life. They had previously attempted to communicate with beings from Mars and had even built equipment to detect UFOs. It was revealed that they had been involved in a strange incident at Atafona Beach sometime prior, where an explosion occurred during one of their experiments. The locals in Campos knew them as eccentric geniuses who were chasing knowledge that was not meant for humans. The notebook's instruction to swallow capsules strongly supports the idea that they took something voluntarily. In the spiritualist circles of the time, there was a belief that certain psychedelic substances or compounds could expand the mind and facilitate telepathic communication. It is possible that the men believed they were taking a substance that would allow them to transcend their physical bodies to meet the signal mentioned in the note. The lead masks, in this context, were likely intended to protect their eyes from the blinding light of a spaceship or the radiation of a celestial being. They expected a close encounter of the third kind, and they dressed for the occasion. However, the murder by fraud theory holds significant weight among skeptics. This theory posits that the men were lured to the hill by a third party, a person they trusted and revered as a medium or contact. This individual may have convinced them that they needed to bring a large sum of money for the experiment, perhaps to showcase their earthly detachment or to purchase alien technology. Once on the hill, this third party could have instructed them to take the capsules as part of the ritual. The capsules, rather than being mind-expanding drugs, were lethal poison, likely cyanide or a similar fast-acting agent that leaves little trace after days of rot. Once the men were dead, the killer simply took the money and walked away, leaving the masks and the note to confuse the police. Suspects did emerge. The police investigated a man named Elcio Gomez, a friend of the victims who had introduced them to some of the more esoteric concepts they were studying. Elcio had a checkered past and gave contradictory statements to the police. He admitted to knowing about their experiments, but denied being on the hill. Another figure, a local criminal known as Hamilton Bazzani, actually confessed to the crime years later while imprisoned for other offenses. He claimed he and a gang had lured the spiritualists to the hill to rob them, forcing them to drink poison at gunpoint. However, police were unable to corroborate his story with physical evidence, and many believed he was confessing simply to gain transfer privileges within the prison system or to gain notoriety. We must also consider the UFO theory, which, while dismissed by law enforcement, remains the most popular explanation among ufologists. On the night of August 17, 1966, there were multiple reports of unidentified flying objects in the skies over Niterói. A local woman named Gracinda Barbosa Coutinho reported seeing an oval-shaped object, orange in color, hovering over Vintém Hill around the time the men would have been dying. She described it as emitting rays of light. Could it be that Manoel and Miguel actually succeeded in calling down a craft? Did they die from exposure to radiation or some unknown energy field emitted by the object? The lead masks suggest they anticipated this energy. If they were murdered by humans, why the elaborate setup with the masks? A robber could have simply shot them. The specificity of the masks implies that the victims were active participants in their own demise, or at least in the events leading up to it. The investigation eventually stalled. The bodies were exhumed in 1969 for further testing, but the results were inconclusive due to the advanced state of decay. The organs that could have held the secret of the capsules had turned to dust. The notebook remained the only solid lead, a haunting script for a play that ended in tragedy. The handwriting was verified as belonging to one of the victims, Miguel, which suggests he was taking dictation from someone else or writing down instructions he had been given previously. The phrasing, "wait for signal," implies passivity, a state of waiting that left them vulnerable. Let us dig deeper into the psychology of the scientific spiritualism movement to understand the mindset of the victims. In 1960s Brazil, there was a syncretism of Kardecist spiritism, Afro-Brazilian religions, and pseudoscience. It wasn't uncommon for groups to meet in remote locations to attempt contact with the beyond. Manoel and Miguel were not casual dabblers. They were electronics technicians, which in their minds gave them a leg up. They viewed the spirit world as a frequency to be tuned into. The lead masks were a technological solution to a spiritual problem. They believed that the eyes were the windows to the soul, and that the intense energy of a spiritual or extraterrestrial manifestation could burn out the retinas or the brain itself. This was a logical precaution within their illogical framework. The capsule's instruction is particularly chilling. After effect protect metals. This likely meant that after the capsules took effect, perhaps inducing a trance or a physiological change, they were to ensure their metal items were protected, or perhaps that they were protected from metals. The grammar is ambiguous, but the sequence is clear. Arrive, take the pill, wait for the signal, put on the mask. It was a procedure. They died following a manual. If we look at the case through the lens of a con game, the cruelty is staggering. The perpetrator would have had to cultivate a long-term relationship with the victims, feeding their delusions, validating their theories, and slowly guiding them toward the idea that a great revelation required a significant financial sacrifice. The money was ostensibly for the car, but why bring it up a muddy hill in the rain? It is highly probable they were told the money needed to be blessed or multiplied, or that the extraterrestrials required a show of material offering. The killer knew they would be compliant. He knew they would lie down in the wet grass, put on the blindfolds, and swallow the poison willingly, believing it was the gateway to the stars. The lead masks served the killer perfectly. They literally blinded the victims to the reality of what was happening until it was too late. There is also a tangential connection to another death that occurred 4 years earlier, known as the Hermes case. In 1962, a television technician was found dead on a different hill, Morro do Cruzeiro, also with a lead mask. This suggests that there may have been a serial predator operating in the region, targeting individuals within this specific subculture, using the same modus operandi. This connection was never fully explored by the police at the time, as record-keeping was poor and the link was only made by researchers years later. If true, it paints a picture of a calculated serial killer who hunted the gullible and the faithful, using their own beliefs as the murder weapon. The legacy of the lead mask's case is one of enduring frustration. It highlights the dangers of unchecked belief and the vulnerability of those who seek answers in the unknown. Manoel and Miguel were seekers. They wanted to understand the universe. They built radios to hear the voices of the dead and wore lead masks to look into the face of God or aliens. In the end, they found only silence and the cold earth of Vintém Hill. Today, Vintém Hill is largely covered by urban sprawl, the mystery buried under layers of concrete and time. The police files are yellowed and incomplete. The organs of the victims are long gone, but the image remains burned into the Brazilian consciousness. Two men in suits, lying in the grass, staring blindly at the sky with metal eyes. Did they meet a higher power that was simply too intense for human physiology to withstand? Were they the victims of a cold-blooded con artist who used their faith to rob and kill them? Or was it a collective delusion that ended in accidental suicide? The note said, "Wait for signal." We are still waiting for the signal that will make sense of this tragedy. This has been a deep dive into the lead masks case by DCF Investigations. We have walked the path up Vintém Hill and examined the evidence left in the rain. Now, I turn the investigation over to you. Do you believe Manoel and Miguel were victims of a terrestrial murder? Or did they encounter something on that hill that defies our current understanding of reality? What do you think the signal was supposed to be? Leave your theories, no matter how unconventional, in the comments below. We read every single one. Until next time, keep looking for the truth, but be careful what you invite in.